The frozen wood split beneath Daphne Harper's axe with a crack that echoed across the empty Montana plains, and she wondered if anyone would hear her scream if the wolves came again tonight. She raised the axe once more, her breath coming out in white clouds that disappeared into the November air of 1882. The sun was sinking low behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she had the luxury of appreciating beauty anymore. Her hands ached despite the thick gloves, and her shoulders burned from the repetitive motion, but she could not stop. The cabin needed wood for the night, and there was nobody else to chop it. 3 months had passed since the fever took her father. 3 months since she had buried him in the hard ground behind their small homestead, just outside the town of Carlin, Montana. 3 months of surviving alone on land that seemed determined to kill her just as surely as it had killed him. She was 22 years old, unmarried and completely isolated on a failing homestead that her father had poured his life into before pneumonia had filled his lungs and stolen his breath. The axe came down again, and this time the log split cleanly. Daphne bent to gather the pieces, stacking them against the side of the cabin where a pitiful pile of firewood stood. It would not be enough. It was never enough. Winter was coming hard this year. Everyone in town had said so, and she was woefully unprepared. She positioned another log on the chopping block, this one thicker and more stubborn than the others. The wood was frozen solid, making each strike feel like hitting stone. Her father had always made it look easy, his powerful arms swinging the axe with practiced precision. But Daphne was not her father, and what had seemed simple when he did it became an exhausting battle when she tried. The sun slipped lower, and the temperature dropped with it. She could feel the cold seeping through her coat, through the layers of clothing she wore beneath. Her fingers were going numb. She swung the axe again, but it barely made a dent in the frozen log. Frustration welled up inside her, mixing with the exhaustion and the loneliness and the constant, gnawing fear that had become her companion. She raised the axe high, putting all her strength into the next swing when a deep voice spoke from behind her. "You are going to hurt yourself swinging like that." Daphne spun around, nearly dropping the axe in surprise. A man stood at the edge of her property, tall and broad-shouldered, sitting astride a large bay horse. The setting sun was behind him, making it hard to see his face clearly, but she could make out a wide-brimmed hat, a heavy coat, and the unmistakable bearing of someone who spent his life working hard land. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she gripped the axe tighter. Out here alone, a strange man appearing without warning could mean any number of things, and few of them were good. "I can manage," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for your concern, but I do not need help." The man dismounted with an easy grace, looping his horse's reins over a fence post. As he stepped closer, she could see him better. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that seemed kind despite the hard set of his mouth. There was something familiar about him, though she could not quite place it. "Name is Ethan Ellis," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I own the ranch about 5 miles east of here. Been meaning to come by since I heard about your father. I am sorry for your loss." Daphne relaxed slightly but did not lower the axe. She had heard of Ethan Ellis, though she had never met him. Her father had mentioned him a few times, always with a tone of respect. Ellis ran one of the larger cattle operations in the area, one of the few that had survived the harsh winters and the volatile cattle market. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate your condolences." Ethan looked at the small pile of wood, then at the frozen log on the chopping block, then back at Daphne. "How long have you been out here?" "An hour, maybe two. I lose track of time. It is going to be dark soon, too dark to chop wood safely." He took a step closer. "And too cold to be out here much longer. Your lips are turning blue." Daphne touched her face, realizing with some alarm that she could barely feel her cheeks. She had been so focused on the task that she had not noticed how dangerously cold she had become. "I need more wood," she said stubbornly. "The pile is not large enough." "No, it is not," Ethan agreed. "Which is why I am going to help you." Before she could protest, he walked over and gently took the axe from her hands. His fingers brushed against hers, and even through both their gloves, she felt a strange spark at the contact. He was warm, she realized. How was he warm when she was so cold? "Go inside," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Warm up by the fire. I will finish this." Pride warred with practicality in Daphne's chest. She did not want charity, did not want to appear weak or incapable. But she was cold, so cold that her whole body was shaking, and the sun was nearly gone. If she stayed out here much longer, she might not make it inside at all. "I do not need your pity," she said, but the words came out weaker than she intended. "Good, because I am not offering it," Ethan replied. He positioned himself in front of the chopping block, testing the weight of the axe. "I am being neighborly. There is a difference. Now go inside before you freeze to death." That would be a waste. Something about the way he said it, matter of fact and almost teasing, made Daphne want to smile despite herself. She nodded and turned toward the cabin, her legs feeling stiff and clumsy as she walked. Behind her, she heard the first powerful swing of the axe, followed by the clean crack of splitting wood. The sound continued, steady and rhythmic, as she pushed open the cabin door and stepped into the relative warmth inside. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and Daphne quickly added more wood from the small indoor supply, coaxing the flames back to life. She held her hands out to the heat, wincing as feeling began to return to her fingers. The pain was intense, like needles driving into her skin, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she had not done permanent damage. Through the small window, she watched Ethan work. He moved with practiced efficiency, each swing of the axe precise and powerful. The frozen logs that had resisted her efforts split easily under his strength. He worked quickly, and within 20 minutes, he had tripled the size of her woodpile. Daphne found herself studying him as he worked. There was something compelling about the way he moved, a confidence that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. When he finally set down the axe and began stacking the wood against the cabin wall, she made a decision. She opened the door and called out, "Would you like some coffee?" "It is the least I can offer for your help." Ethan looked up, surprise crossing his face before he nodded. "Coffee would be welcome. Thank you." She went back inside and put the coffee pot on, grateful that she had grounds left. Money was tight, tighter than she wanted to admit, but she could spare coffee for a man who had likely saved her from frostbite or worse. When Ethan entered the cabin a few minutes later, he removed his hat and gloves, looking around the small space with what seemed like professional assessment. The cabin was neat but sparse, containing little more than a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a few shelves, and the hearth. Her father's things were still everywhere, his coat still hanging by the door, his pipe still sitting on the mantel. She had not been able to bring herself to put them away. "Your father built this place himself, did he not?" Ethan asked. "Yes. When he first claimed the land 10 years ago, he had plans to build something bigger, but—" She trailed off, the familiar ache of grief tightening her throat. "But life got in the way," Ethan finished gently. "It has a habit of doing that." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed him one. Their fingers brushed again, and again she felt that strange warmth, that spark of something she did not quite understand. "Why did you really come here?" she asked, sitting down at the table and gesturing for him to do the same. "If you have been meaning to visit for 3 months, why today?" Ethan sat, cradling the coffee cup in his large hands. "Honestly, I saw smoke from your chimney this morning and realized I had been putting it off too long. And then on my way over, I saw you out there chopping wood, and I could see even from a distance that you were struggling. So you did pity me." "No." He met her eyes directly. "I respected you. Do you know how many women in your position would have already sold the land and moved back east? Or married the first man who offered just to have someone to take care of them? But here you are, alone, trying to chop frozen wood at sunset because you know you need it to survive. That is not something to pity. That is something to admire." The words hit Daphne harder than she expected. No one had said anything like that to her in months. The people in town mostly looked at her with a mixture of pity and disapproval. A young, unmarried woman living alone. The few men who had come calling had made it clear they were interested in her land more than in her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." They drank their coffee in companionable silence for a moment before Ethan spoke again. "How are you managing out here, truly?" Daphne considered lying, but something about his direct gaze and genuine concern made her want to be honest. "Not well," she admitted. "I am running out of money. The crops failed this year before my father passed, and I do not have enough livestock to sell. I have been trying to make the stores last, but winter is coming and I am not prepared." "What about family? Is there anyone who could help?" "No. My mother died when I was young. My father had a brother back in Pennsylvania, but they had not spoken in years. I wrote to him after my father passed, but I have not received a response. I think he might be gone too, or he simply does not care." Ethan set down his coffee cup, his expression thoughtful. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Harper. I need help on my ranch. The workload has gotten too heavy for me and my 2 ranch hands to manage alone, especially with winter coming. I need someone who can cook, help with the household work, and assist with some of the lighter ranch tasks. The pay would be fair, and it would include room and board." Daphne's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of leaving her father's land, even temporarily, felt like a betrayal, but she forced herself to think practically. What good would her pride do if she froze or starved to death before spring? "You are offering me a job?" she asked carefully. "Yes. I know it is not conventional, a young, unmarried woman living on a ranch with 3 men. But I promise you, you would be treated with complete respect. You would have your own room in the house, and I give you my word that no harm would come to you." "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." Ethan was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Your father helped me once, years ago. I had just bought the ranch, and I was young and stupid and made a bad deal with a cattle broker. I lost almost everything. Your father loaned me money to get through that first winter, would not even accept interest on it. He said neighbors looked out for each other. I paid him back, but I never forgot what he did. Consider this me returning the favor." Daphne felt tears prick at her eyes. That sounded exactly like something her father would have done. He had always believed in helping people, even when they had little to spare themselves. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say you will think about it. You do not have to decide tonight. But the offer stands for as long as you need it." He finished his coffee and stood, placing his hat back on his head. At the door, he paused. "I will come by tomorrow with more wood. You have enough for tonight and maybe tomorrow morning, but not much beyond that. And Miss Harper, do not chop wood alone at sunset anymore. It is too dangerous." Before she could respond, he was gone, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the darkness. Daphne sat at the table for a long time, staring into her coffee cup and thinking about Ethan Ellis's offer. Part of her wanted to refuse out of pride, to prove that she could survive on her own. But another part of her, the practical part that sounded a lot like her father, knew that pride was a luxury she could not afford. That night, she lay in bed listening to the wind howl around the cabin and thought about warm brown eyes and strong hands taking the axe from her frozen fingers. True to his word, Ethan returned the next morning with a wagon full of split wood. He brought his 2 ranch hands with him, both of them polite young men who tipped their hats to her and called her madam. Together, they unloaded enough wood to last her through several weeks, stacking it neatly against the cabin and under the small overhang that served as a porch. "This is too much," Daphne protested. "I cannot possibly pay you for all this." "I am not asking you to pay," Ethan said. "Consider it an advance on your wages if you decide to take the job." Over the next week, Ethan found reasons to stop by almost every day. He brought supplies, fixed a loose board on her roof, checked the integrity of her fences. Each time, he stayed for coffee and they talked. Daphne found herself looking forward to these visits, found herself watching the horizon for the sight of his horse. She learned that Ethan was 26 years old, that he had come to Montana from Kansas 5 years ago, that he had built his ranch from almost nothing into a thriving operation. She learned that he had lost his parents to cholera when he was 19, that he had a sister back in Kansas who was married with children, that he loved this hard land despite how often it tried to break him. In turn, she told him about her childhood, about her mother's death from influenza, about her father's dreams for their homestead. She told him about the loneliness, about the fear, about the stubborn determination that kept her going even when everything seemed hopeless. "You remind me of this land," Ethan said one afternoon as they sat on her porch, watching the sun dip toward the mountains. Beautiful and tough and unforgiving. Daphne felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am not beautiful." "Yes, you are." He said it simply, as a statement of fact rather than flattery. "Your father must have told you that." "My father told me I was strong. He said beauty faded, but strength lasted." He was not wrong, but I think you can be both. The way he looked at her made Daphne's heart race. There was something in his eyes, something warm and intense that she had never seen directed at her before. It frightened her and thrilled her in equal measure. "I have decided to take your offer," she said, changing the subject because she did not know how to respond to what she saw in his face. "The job, I mean, if it is still available." A smile spread across Ethan's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "It is still available. When can you start?" "I need a few days to close up the cabin properly to make sure everything is secure for the winter." "Would next Monday be acceptable?" Monday would be perfect. That Sunday, Daphne packed her meager belongings into a trunk that had belonged to her mother. She cleaned the cabin thoroughly, banking the fire low so the pipes would not freeze, covering the furniture with sheets. It felt wrong to leave, like she was abandoning her father's memory, but she reminded herself that she was not selling the land. She was just leaving for a few months, just until spring when she could figure out a better plan. Ethan arrived Monday morning with the wagon. He helped her load her trunk and a few other items she wanted to bring. As they drove away from the homestead, Daphne looked back at the small cabin growing smaller in the distance and felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You can come back anytime," Ethan said gently. "This is not permanent unless you want it to be." The Ellis ranch was larger than Daphne had expected. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built from timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There was a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals that held more cattle than she had ever seen in one place. "Your father built all this?" she asked, awed. "No, I built it. Well, I and about 24 hired men over the course of 5 years." Ethan helped her down from the wagon. "It is not fancy, but it is solid. It will stand for generations if it is cared for properly." He showed her inside, and Daphne was surprised by how welcoming the house felt. The furniture was simple but well made, the floors were clean, and there were small touches that showed someone cared about the space. Curtains hung in the windows, books lined a shelf by the fireplace, and the kitchen was well organized and functional. "Your room is upstairs," Ethan said, carrying her trunk up a narrow staircase. "It is the door on the right. The left is my room, and there is a washroom at the end of the hall. The hands sleep in the bunkhouse, so you do not need to worry about them being in the house." The room he showed her was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in quilts, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the mountains. It was the nicest room Daphne had ever had. "It is wonderful," she said. "Thank you. Settle in. Come down when you are ready, and I will show you around the rest of the place." That first day set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Daphne woke before dawn to make breakfast for Ethan and the 2 ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Will Carter. After breakfast, the men would head out to their work while Daphne cleaned the house, did laundry, prepared meals, and helped with whatever other tasks needed doing. It was hard work, harder in some ways than trying to survive alone on her homestead, but it was different. She was not alone anymore. There were people around her, people who talked and laughed and treated her with kindness. Tom and Will were respectful and friendly, often entertaining her with stories of their various mishaps while working on the ranch. But it was Ethan who occupied most of her thoughts. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the way he moved, the way he handled the animals with firm gentleness, the way he treated everyone around him with fairness and respect. He was a good man, the kind of man her father would have approved of, and she was beginning to realize that her feelings for him were growing beyond simple gratitude or friendship. The problem was that she had no idea if he felt the same way. He was kind to her, certainly, but he was kind to everyone. He sometimes looked at her in ways that made her breath catch, but he never acted on it, never crossed the invisible line of propriety that existed between employer and employee. Winter arrived in full force in early December. Snow fell heavily, piling up in drifts that reached the windows. The work on the ranch became more difficult, focused on keeping the cattle fed and the buildings maintained. Daphne spent more time indoors, cooking and baking and keeping the house warm and comfortable. One evening, about 2 months after she had moved to the ranch, a blizzard hit with a ferocity that frightened even Ethan. The wind screamed around the house, and snow fell so thickly that they could not see more than a few feet beyond the windows. Tom and Will had made it to the bunkhouse before the worst of it hit, but Ethan had been out checking on some cattle in the far pasture. Daphne paced the kitchen anxiously, starting every time the wind made the house creak, her mind conjuring terrible images of Ethan lost in the snow. When the door finally burst open and Ethan stumbled in, covered in snow and ice, Daphne ran to him without thinking. "Thank God you are safe. I was so worried." She helped him remove his frozen coat, his hat caked with ice. His face was red from the cold, his lips nearly blue. She led him to the fireplace, wrapping blankets around him, bringing him hot coffee with shaking hands. "I could not see anything," Ethan said, his teeth chattering. "I followed the fence line back, but I lost it twice. I thought I might not make it. But you did. You are here, you are safe." Daphne realized she was gripping his hand tightly and forced herself to let go. "I will make you something hot to eat." "Daphne, wait." His voice stopped her as she turned toward the kitchen. "Stay here, please." She sat beside him on the floor in front of the fire, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from the flames. The blizzard raged outside, but inside, in this moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said. The cold seemed to have burned away whatever filter usually governed his words. "I did not just offer you that job because I owed your father a debt. I mean, that was part of it, but not all of it." Daphne's heart began to pound. "What do you mean? I saw you in town once, about a year ago. You were with your father buying supplies. You smiled at something he said, and I thought I had never seen anyone so beautiful. I wanted to introduce myself, but I was covered in dust from a cattle drive and I looked like hell, and you looked like something out of a dream. So I did not." He turned to face her, his eyes intense despite his exhaustion. "And then your father died, and I heard you were out there alone, and all I could think about was finding a way to help you without insulting your pride. So I came up with the job, and I told myself it was just about the debt I owed, but I was lying. I wanted you here. I wanted to see you every day. I wanted the chance to know you, to talk to you, to maybe make you smile like you smiled that day in town." Daphne could barely breathe. "Ethan, I know this is not appropriate. You work for me, and I should not be saying any of this. But I thought I was going to die out there tonight, and all I could think about was that I never told you how I feel. I never told you that somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Daphne felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I thought I was imagining it," she whispered. "The way you looked at me sometimes, I thought it was wishful thinking. Wishful thinking. Because I have feelings for you too. I have tried to ignore them, tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or loneliness, but it is not. When you did not come back tonight, when the storm got worse and you were still out there, I felt like my heart was being torn from my chest. I realized I could not lose you. I realized I love you too." Ethan reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," Daphne breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and perfect. The kiss warmed her more thoroughly than the fire ever could, chasing away the cold and the fear and the loneliness she had carried for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "So what happens now?" Daphne asked. "Now I do this properly," Ethan said. He took her hand, holding it like it was something precious. "Daphne Harper, would you allow me to court you? Officially, I mean. I know the situation is unusual with you living here, but we can figure that out. Maybe you could stay in town, or we could find a chaperone, or—" "I do not care about any of that," Daphne interrupted. "Yes, yes, you can court me." The blizzard lasted 3 days. During that time, the world outside became a frozen wasteland. But inside the ranch house, something warm and wonderful was blooming. They talked for hours, learning everything about each other. Ethan told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to build something lasting, about hoping someday to have a family to pass it all on to. Daphne told him about her love of reading, about the garden she wanted to plant in the spring, about the fear that had haunted her since her father's death, that she would always be alone. "You will never be alone again," Ethan promised. "Not if I have anything to say about it." When the storm finally broke, the world was transformed into a landscape of white. The work of digging out was enormous, but Ethan and the Carter brothers approached it with good humor, and Daphne helped where she could, shoveling paths between buildings and making sure everyone had plenty of hot food. Tom and Will had noticed the change between Ethan and Daphne immediately, but they seemed genuinely happy about it. "About time," Will said with a grin. "The boss has been mooning over you since you arrived." "I have not been mooning," Ethan protested. "You absolutely have been," Tom agreed. "We have been running a betting pool on how long it would take you to work up the nerve to say something." Daphne laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. As Christmas approached, Ethan asked Daphne if she would accompany him to the town dance. It would be their first public appearance as a courting couple, and Daphne felt nervous about it. She knew how people talked, knew that there would be gossip about how quickly their relationship had developed. "Let them talk," Ethan said firmly. "I do not care what anyone thinks. I know how I feel about you, and that is all that matters." The dance was held in the town hall, which had been decorated with pine boughs and candles. When they walked in together, Daphne felt every eye in the room turn toward them. She held her head high, her hand resting on Ethan's arm. Several people approached them throughout the evening. Some were genuinely warm in their congratulations, while others were clearly fishing for gossip. Ethan handled them all with polite but firm boundaries, making it clear that their relationship was not up for public discussion or judgment. When the music started, he led her onto the dance floor. Daphne had not danced in years, but Ethan was a good lead, and she found herself relaxing into the movement, into the pleasure of being held in his arms in front of the whole town. "I was thinking," Ethan said as they swayed to the music, "that come spring, when the circuit preacher comes through town, maybe we could do more than just court." Daphne's breath caught. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I am saying that I love you and I do not want to waste time. I want to marry you, Daphne. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. I know it has not been very long, but when you know, you know. And I know." Tears filled Daphne's eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Ethan stopped dancing right there in the middle of the floor and kissed her, not caring who was watching. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Daphne laughed against his lips, feeling joy so intense it was almost painful. The winter months passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Daphne worked on making her wedding dress, altering one that had belonged to Ethan's mother, which his sister had sent from Kansas along with her enthusiastic blessings. Ethan worked on expanding the house, adding a room that could eventually serve as a nursery, though they did not speak of that directly yet. In March, the circuit preacher arrived. The wedding was held in the small church in Carlin, attended by nearly everyone in town. Daphne wore her altered dress and carried wildflowers that Ethan had ridden out early that morning to pick. She walked down the aisle alone, wishing her father could be there, but feeling his presence nonetheless. When she reached the front of the church and placed her hand in Ethan's, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and the joining of two lives, but Daphne barely heard the words. She was too focused on Ethan's face, on the love and promise she saw there. "I do," she said when the moment came, her voice clear and strong. "I do," Ethan echoed. When they kissed as husband and wife, Daphne felt like she was finally, truly home. The celebration that followed was lively and joyful. There was food and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Tom and Will gave a speech that was equal parts sentimental and embarrassing, revealing several stories about Ethan's awkward attempts to impress Daphne in those early weeks. Everyone laughed, including Ethan, who took the ribbing in good humor. As the sun set, Ethan and Daphne slipped away from the celebration, riding back to the ranch in a wagon decorated with ribbons and tin cans. The noise of the cans faded as they left town behind, replaced by the peaceful sounds of evening on the prairie. "Happy?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Daphne replied honestly. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other that felt both exciting and natural. Ethan was gentle, patient, making sure Daphne felt safe and cherished. When she fell asleep in his arms, she thought about how far she had come from that frozen evening chopping wood alone, how a simple act of kindness had transformed her entire life. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranch life was hard, full of challenges and setbacks. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle that got sick, equipment that broke down. But through it all, Ethan and Daphne faced everything together. In the fall of 1883, Daphne discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both of them with joy and terror in equal measure. When her time came the following spring, it was a difficult labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Ethan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. Their son was born just after dawn on a clear April morning. He was small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that he demonstrated immediately. They named him Thomas, after Daphne's father, and the middle name James, after Ethan's father. Holding her son for the first time, Daphne wept with happiness. Ethan sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her, his face full of wonder as he looked at their child. "We made this," he said softly. "This perfect little person, we made him." "He has your nose," Daphne said, tracing the baby's tiny features. "He has your eyes. Look at how blue they are." Tom and Will were utterly smitten with the baby, competing for who got to hold him more. They became honorary uncles, teaching Thomas to ride almost as soon as he could walk, telling him stories, spoiling him thoroughly. 2 years later, Daphne gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, observant and serious even as an infant. Where Thomas was all energy and motion, Sarah was thoughtful and careful. The children grew up surrounded by love and wide open spaces. Daphne taught them to read and write, to appreciate beauty, to be kind. Ethan taught them to ride and rope, to respect the land and the animals, to work hard and keep their word. The ranch prospered under Ethan's careful management and Daphne's partnership. She proved to have a head for numbers, taking over the bookkeeping and turning out to have a talent for finding ways to save money and increase efficiency. Together, they built the ranch into one of the most successful operations in Montana. Daphne never sold her father's homestead. Instead, she and Ethan fixed it up, turning it into a place where they could go when they wanted to get away from the busy ranch. Sometimes they would take the children there for a weekend, and Daphne would tell them stories about their grandfather, about the man who had built that cabin with his own hands and had dreamed of a better life. On one such trip, when Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 8, they stood together looking at the old chopping block where Daphne had been working that fateful sunset evening. "Is this where you and Papa met?" Sarah asked. "Not exactly," Daphne said, smiling at Ethan across the children's heads. "I was here chopping wood, freezing and struggling and too proud to admit I needed help. Your father came along and took the axe from my hands. And took Mama's heart at the same time," Ethan added with a grin. "That came later," Daphne corrected, though she was smiling. "But not much later." Thomas picked up the axe, which was still kept in the small shed beside the cabin. "Can you teach me to split wood, Papa?" "I think you are ready," Ethan said. "But we do it the right way. Not alone at sunset when it is too cold and too late. We do it safely, with someone else around, during the day when we can see what we are doing." As Ethan showed their son the proper way to position the log, the correct way to swing the axe, Daphne watched with a full heart. She thought about that desperate, lonely woman she had been, struggling to survive, thinking she would always be alone. She thought about how one man's kindness, one moment of intervention, had changed everything. In 1895, when Daphne was 35 and Ethan was 39, they welcomed an unexpected third child, another son they named William, after Will Carter, who had passed away the previous year from a sudden illness. The baby brought new life to the ranch, and his older siblings doted on him endlessly. As the children grew, Thomas showed interest in taking over the ranch someday. Sarah developed a passion for teaching and eventually opened a small school in Carlin, educating the children of ranchers and townspeople alike. William, the baby, turned out to have a gift with horses, training them with a patience and skill that amazed everyone. Ethan and Daphne grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of their early days matured into something richer and more profound, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering commitment. On their 20th anniversary, Ethan surprised Daphne by taking her back to the site where they had first met. The old homestead had been maintained over the years, and it stood as sturdy as ever. He led her to the chopping block, which still bore the marks of countless axe strikes. "I have thought a lot about this place," Ethan said, taking both her hands in his, "about what it represents, about how close I came to riding past that evening to deciding I would visit some other day." "But you did not," Daphne said. "You stopped. You helped. Best decision I ever made." "Well, second best. The best was asking you to marry me." He pulled her close. "I love you, Daphne, just as much now as I did then. More, actually, because now I know exactly what I am loving. I know your strength, your kindness, your stubbornness, your grace. I know how you hum when you are baking, how you scrunch your nose when you are concentrating, how you always check on the children one more time before bed even though they are grown. I know you, and I love every single part." Daphne felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you too. You saved me, Ethan. Not just that night with the wood, but in every way that matters. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I thought I would never have it." They kissed there beside the old chopping block, the Montana wind whispering through the grass around them, the sun setting in its familiar position behind the mountains. As the years continued to pass, Ethan and Daphne became the elders of their community, respected for their fairness, their generosity, and the example of their marriage. Young couples often sought their advice, and they always gave the same counsel. Marry your best friend, choose each other every day, and never let pride keep you from accepting help when you need it. Thomas married at 23, bringing his wife Rebecca to live on the ranch. They took over more of the daily operations, allowing Ethan and Daphne to slow down a bit, though neither of them ever fully retired. Sarah married a teacher from a neighboring town, and they had 4 children who spent their summers at the ranch, riding horses and learning about their heritage. William married later, at 28, to a woman who shared his love of horses, and together they bred some of the finest stock in Montana. Grandchildren filled the ranch house with noise and laughter. Ethan built additions to accommodate the growing family, and Daphne cooked enormous meals that brought everyone together around the long dining table. These gatherings were loud and chaotic and filled with love, exactly what both Ethan and Daphne had dreamed of during those early days when it was just the two of them. On a warm summer evening in 1910, when Daphne was 50 and Ethan was 54, they sat together on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for nearly 3 decades. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, their voices carrying on the evening air. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Daphne asked, her hand in Ethan's. "Sometimes I imagine something like it," Ethan admitted. "But the reality is better than anything I could have dreamed up. How about you?" Daphne thought back to that desperate woman chopping frozen wood, alone and afraid and certain she would not survive the winter. She thought about the moment when a stranger had appeared and offered help, how that simple act of kindness had changed the trajectory of her entire life. "No," she said honestly. "I never imagined anything this good. I thought I would be alone. I thought I would struggle and fight, and maybe, if I was lucky, I would survive. But this, a husband I love, children and grandchildren, a home that is full of life and laughter. I never dreamed I could have this." "You deserve it all," Ethan said, raising her hand to his lips. "You deserve this and more." "We both do," Daphne corrected. "We built this together." As the sun finally slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Daphne of that long-ago sunset, she leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and felt profound gratitude. Not just for the big things, the obvious blessings, but for the small moments too. For morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. For the way Ethan still opened doors for her after all these years. For the sound of his breathing beside her at night. For the life they had created, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. Their grandson James, Thomas's eldest son, came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Grandpa, Grandma, come see. There is a fox down by the stream, and he has 3 kits with him." Ethan and Daphne exchanged a smile and stood, allowing themselves to be pulled along by their enthusiastic grandson. As they walked toward the stream, surrounded by family, Daphne reached for Ethan's hand. He took it without hesitation, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. The years continued their steady march forward. Ethan and Daphne celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 40th. Their children gave them more grandchildren, and those grandchildren eventually began having children of their own, making Ethan and Daphne great-grandparents. The ranch remained successful under Thomas's management, though the world around them was changing rapidly. Automobiles began to appear on the roads. Telephones connected people across great distances. The old ways were fading, but the Ellis Ranch held onto its traditions while also embracing useful innovations. Through it all, Ethan and Daphne remained each other's constant. When Ethan's joints began to ache with arthritis, Daphne rubbed salve into them every night. When Daphne's eyesight began to fail, Ethan read to her every evening, his voice bringing stories to life. They had become so attuned to each other that they often did not need words to communicate. A glance, a touch, a small gesture was enough. In the spring of 1925, Ethan fell ill. It started as what seemed like a simple cold, but it settled into his lungs and would not leave. The doctor came from town, grave-faced, and told Daphne privately that there was little he could do. Ethan's body, worn from decades of hard work and now aged 69 years, was simply wearing out. Daphne refused to accept it at first. She nursed Ethan with the same fierce determination she had once used to chop frozen wood alone. She made broths and teas, kept him warm, sat by his bedside reading to him or simply holding his hand. Their children and grandchildren came to visit, filling the house with family one last time. Ethan rallied enough to speak with each of them, to give advice and blessings, to tell them how proud he was of the people they had become. On a warm May evening, with wildflowers blooming outside the window and the sun setting over the mountains, Ethan called Daphne to his side. "Come here," he whispered, his voice weak but his eyes still bright with love. Daphne lay down beside him on the bed, careful not to jostle him. He turned his head to look at her, and she saw a lifetime of love in his gaze. "Best thing I ever did," he said, each word an effort, "was take that axe from your hands." "Second best," Daphne corrected, tears streaming down her face. Best thing was loving me all these years. No, Ethan smiled. That was not a decision, that was inevitable. From the moment I saw you, I was yours. The only choice was whether to do something about it. I am so glad you did. Me too. His hand found hers, his grip weak but still there. Do not grieve too long, promise me. You have always been strong, but you have also always been alive. Stay alive, Daphne. Enjoy our grandchildren. Keep baking those pies. Keep humming when you work. Keep being you. I promise, she whispered, though she did not know how she would keep breathing without him. I love you, Ethan said. Always have, always will. Even death would not change that. I love you too, so much. He smiled, his eyes beginning to close. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being my wife, my partner, my best friend. Thank you for this life. Thank you for saving me, Daphne said, for seeing me when I was lost and showing me the way home. Ethan's breathing grew slower, more labored. Daphne held him close, whispering words of love, singing softly the songs he had always liked. As the sun finally set, as the room filled with the gentle darkness of evening, Ethan took one last breath and was gone. Daphne held him for a long time, crying silently, feeling like half of her soul had been torn away. But even in her grief, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. Gratitude that she had been given the gift of his love, that she had known what it meant to be truly cherished. The funeral was huge, attended by what seemed like half of Montana. Ethan had been respected and loved by many, and they came to pay their respects. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone marker that read, Ethan James Ellis, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built a life worth living. The weeks after were difficult. Daphne moved through them in a haze, going through the motions but feeling hollow. Her children worried about her, stayed close, but she assured them she would be all right. She had made Ethan a promise, and she intended to keep it. Slowly, gradually, life began to return to normal. Daphne could not run the ranch anymore, but she could still contribute in other ways. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them to bake, telling them stories about their grandfather and the early days of the ranch. She kept herself busy, kept herself engaged with life. But every evening, she would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, remembering a man who had taken an axe from her frozen hands and given her the world in return. Daphne lived for another 12 years after Ethan's death, years that were full of family and purpose. She saw more grandchildren married, more great-grandchildren born. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's care, saw Sarah's school expand and thrive, saw William's horses win competitions across the state. She never remarried, never even considered it. She had had her great love, and nothing could compare to what she and Ethan had shared. In the spring of 1937, at the age of 77, Daphne passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Ethan on the hill, their markers side by side, looking out over the land they had loved. Her marker read, Daphne Marie Harper Ellis, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She chose love and found home. The ranch remained in the Ellis family for generations after, each new owner knowing the story of how it began. They knew about the desperate young woman chopping frozen wood at sunset, about the rancher who stopped to help, about how that single act of kindness had built a legacy that endured. On quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Montana mountains in shades of orange and purple, family members would sometimes gather on the old porch and tell the story again. They would talk about Ethan and Daphne, about the love that had sustained them through hardship and joy, about the family they had built and the values they had instilled. And sometimes, if you listened carefully, You could almost hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of voices, the sound of two souls who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to build something beautiful together. The old chopping block remained at the original homestead, weathered and worn but still standing. It became a family tradition for newlyweds to visit it, to stand where Ethan and Daphne had first met, to remember that the greatest loves often begin with simple kindness, with the willingness to help someone in need, with the courage to take a chance on the unknown. The story of Ethan and Daphne became legend in Carlin, Montana. Parents told it to their children as an example of true love, of the importance of helping your neighbors, of how life can change in an instant if you are brave enough to let it. But for the Ellis family, it was more than just a story. It was their foundation, their beginning, the proof that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions. It was a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come when you stop struggling alone and allow someone else to help carry the load. Years became decades, and decades became a century, but the story never faded. The ranch house still stood, expanded and renovated but maintaining its essential character. The hill where Ethan and Daphne were buried became a place of peace, where family members went to think, to remember, to connect with their history. And on cold winter evenings, when the wind howled across the Montana plains and snow piled high against the buildings, the current residents of the Ellis Ranch would gather around the fireplace. They would think about their ancestors, about the woman who had been alone and afraid, and the man who had offered help without expecting anything in return. They would remember that love is not always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it is a choice made over and over again. Sometimes it is taking an axe from frozen hands. Sometimes it is offering a job, a kind word, a moment of compassion. Sometimes it is the simple decision to care for another person, to see their struggle and choose to help. And always, always, they would remember that from that single act of kindness, from that moment when Ethan Ellis took the axe from Daphne Harper's hands, an entire legacy was born. A legacy of love, of family, of hard work and dedication. A legacy that proved that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, even when life seemed impossible and hope felt distant, love could take root and flourish. The sun would set over the ranch, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and purple. And somewhere, somehow, the love of Ethan and Daphne Ellis would continue to echo through the generations. A reminder that the best stories are the ones that never truly end, that live on in the hearts and lives of those who come after. Their love story, which began with frozen wood and a kind stranger, had become eternal, woven into the very fabric of the land they had loved and the family they had created. And that, perhaps, was the greatest happy ending of all.